see. All right, I think we're ready to go here. So today I'm going to be talking about the 7 Enlightenment Factors, also referred to as the Factors of Awakening. And I thought I'd start with a quote from our good friend Jack Kornfield. I got this off one of his blogs not too long ago. He says, "One of the clearest and most useful ways to describe practice is in terms of the 7 factors of enlightenment. These are the natural qualities of mind that the Buddha described as constituents of proper spiritual practice. A mind in which these factors are truly developed and balanced experiences freedom. A mind in which these factors are truly developed and balanced experiences freedom." The 7 Enlightenment Factors. I think it's helpful when we talk about Buddhist concepts that we begin by reminding ourselves what the Buddha meant by enlightenment. There were a lot of different spiritual traditions at the time of the Buddha, and the Buddha's awakening was very specific. He described a very particular insight. And the Buddha's spiritual journey began with a very specific question. His question was, is it possible to have a true and ultimate happiness that signifies the complete freedom from human suffering? That was his question. That was his search. He wanted to know if there was an ultimate happiness, a true happiness that marked the end of human suffering. So here's a spoiler alert. If you don't know how this story ends, there was the Enlightenment, right? And the Buddha's claim was, yes, it is possible to know true happiness and be free from suffering. When the Buddha looked around his world, he saw exactly what we tend to see. When people talk about happiness, we're often referring to outside circumstances going well. We're saying things are going good, I feel happy. Most of the time when we use the word happiness, we're referring to things like our station in life. We like our job, our kids are doing well in school, right? We have our marriage is working, partnerships are going well, there's optimism about the future. It's always dependent on outside circumstances. Another thing that the Buddha noticed is that oftentimes when people talk about being happy, that happiness has visibly come at someone else's expense. The happiness has come on the backs of somebody else's suffering. It could be the fact that we have a particular amount of possessions and we have them because other people do not. It could be that we're in a position of political power that we've gotten on the backs of somebody else's labor. Either way, it was obvious to the Buddha, as it is to us today, that some people's claims to happiness are the direct result of other people's suffering. So when the Buddha said that he had found a true and ultimate happiness, he was really looking for a happiness that was not dependent on outside circumstances, something that was lasting, permanent, and a type of happiness that he referred to as blameless, meaning happiness that does not come at the expense of somebody else's well-being, our own included, a happiness that does not harm us and a happiness that does not harm others. And when the Buddha describes his insight, oftentimes it's described something like this. He says, as human beings, pain and unpleasantness are inevitable. The human experience is going to bring, Robert was talking about this thing popping. We'll see if I can get it not to pop. Pain and unpleasantness are inevitable. As human beings, as human beings, we're always going to experience several things that are universal to the human condition: aging, illness, and death, and the circumstances in which we're separated from things that we like and people that we love. As human beings, this is inevitable. This unpleasantness is going to be there. At some point, we're going to get sick, and we know what a drag that is, right? We're going to have to confront our own death. We're going to have the experience of people that we love pass away. And then just day to day, we're going to have these experiences of being separated from things that we really, really want, right? Things that we can't have either because of circumstances or money or physical distance, whatever the case may be. It's pretty obvious. You don't have to be a human very long to realize you can't always get what you want, right? And there's going to be that unpleasantness, and that's inevitable. The Buddha didn't deny that there's going to be pain, right? And there's going to be unpleasantness. But what he said was suffering is optional. Pain and unpleasantness are going to be there inevitably, but suffering is optional. And the reason being is that his discovery was that both suffering and happiness are not actually caused by outside circumstances. Happiness and suffering are caused by the qualities of our consciousness that we bring to each passing moment. It's not dependent on the outside world. So most of the time when we're moving through the world and we're having this experience day to day, we sort of mistake the outside circumstances as the cause for how we're feeling inside. The Buddha's insight through mindfulness was that happiness and suffering are actually caused by the qualities in our mind that we bring to each passing moment. And the qualities of mind that he says we need to cultivate in order to experience freedom and happiness are the Enlightenment Factors. These are the 7 qualities that the Buddha encourages us to cultivate through meditation practice in order to experience the freedom that he experienced through that same journey. So what I'd like to do, Christine, would you mind passing these out? I've got a little diagram here. That should be enough. If not, I have more on the 7 Enlightenment Factors. A fellow meditator, who's also a graphic artist, was generous enough with her time to draw this up for us. And you'll see soon enough when you get it in your hand that this is not a traditional Buddhist drawing of the Enlightenment Factors. It is a very helpful one, I think, though. So we have 7 Enlightenment Factors. And the Enlightenment Factors are mindfulness, investigation, effort, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. Now, I'll explain the teeter-totter in a minute, right? The sacred teeter-totter. I'll explain that in a second. So, traditionally, the Enlightenment Factors are divided up into 2 camps. On the left side of our teeter-totter, we have the invigorating, the energizing, or the stimulating factors in our awareness. On the right side of the teeter-totter, we have the calming, more tranquil factors: tranquility, concentration, equanimity. These are the more calming factors in our mind. Mindfulness is the fulcrum. It's the ground on which the teeter-totter moves back and forth. The reason mindfulness is at the base is that mindfulness is considered neutral. And we need to start with mindfulness in order to cultivate any of the other factors. We can't do anything if we're not present, right? If we're not in the present moment, it's hard to see what's going on in the mind or to do anything with it. So mindfulness is the center, and then we have our invigorating, our energizing factors on one side, and our calming factors on the other. And as Jack was saying in his quote, we're asked to balance them, right? Hence the teeter-totter. We want to balance the Enlightenment Factors. The Buddha actually describes it like this. He says there's 3 things you're expected to do with your meditation practice. The first thing we want to do is cultivate the Enlightenment Factors. And this just really refers to the meditation practice itself. All of the meditation practices that we do, no matter what they are, to some degree are going to be cultivating one or more of these factors of enlightenment. The second thing he asks us to do is to sustain these factors in our awareness. And what he means by that is we just want to have these factors becoming more and more frequent visitors in our mind, right? If happiness is caused by these factors being present, we want these guys to hang around, right? We want these to be coming more frequently into consciousness. And the way I kind of see it, it's like you can invite a few of these enlightenment factors over for tea, and they might stay for an hour or 2, right? You might invite them over for like a barbecue where they may stay for a few hours. But the ideal is that you want to like have them rent a room in your house, right? You want to like build some bunk beds in the back, 7 of them, and like get them to move in. You want them in your mind all the time, right? This is what our meditation practice does. It cultivates the enlightenment factors and sustains them. And the third thing that the Buddha asks us to do is to balance them, as Jack was saying, to balance the enlightenment factors. And I'll go into that in a minute, but what that really means is that it is possible to have too much energy in the meditation. We experience meditation oftentimes. There's a restlessness, there's an agitation. If there's too much of the energizing factors, the meditation can feel very disruptive. Similarly, though, if we have too much of the calming factors, we start nodding off, right? We get kind of dull and foggy-headed. So it's possible to have too much or too little of these factors. So our meditation practice, as it progresses, allows us to learn to cultivate these factors, and then we learn how to kind of use them as levers, so to speak, and get them in balance in our mind. And this will become clearer kind of as we move through. Let's see. Okay, well, let's jump in. I'll try to get through all 7. We'll see. There's quite a few here. Let's start with mindfulness. Again, mindfulness is the ground of our practice. We always start with being present and being aware. We have to start with presence because that's the doorway to the present moment. If we're not mindful, we're not going to be able to access these qualities. What I wanted to do is give a sort of a contemporary definition of mindfulness, something we're all familiar with. And then I wanted to give a traditional, more old school definition of mindfulness, more along the lines of how the Buddha actually describes the skill of mindfulness. So you're probably familiar with this definition. Mindfulness is a loving, accepting, non-judgmental awareness that simply notes what is happening in the present moment without reacting or interfering. A loving, open, non-judgmental awareness that does not react to the present moment, right? It just watches. Now that is a great definition. It's a perfect definition, actually. It's just not a definition of mindfulness. It's actually the Buddha's definition of equanimity. Our 7th factor on the right-hand side of the teeter-totter. Non-judgmental awareness is actually the Buddha's definition of equanimity. The definition that Buddha gives with mindfulness is far simpler. So get ready, because I know this is probably hardly ever spoken in this way, right? So this is how the Buddha defines mindfulness. Mindfulness is the skill or ability to keep something in mind. That's mindfulness. The ability or skill to keep something in mind. So what does that mean, right? There's more to it, of course, but that's the traditional definition. What the Buddha means is, and we experienced this earlier today in meditation, right? We're invited to be with the breath, right? We keep the breath in mind. And then what happens? It's a simple invitation. A minute later, the mind decides to do something else, right? It runs off. It runs into the future and starts thinking about what we're doing after we're going to be meditating, right? We're like thinking about brunch or Starbucks or something else, like chores we have to do. All we're asking is for the mind to keep the breath present, right? In awareness, to keep it in mind. And then it rolls into the past, and we're thinking about our work week and unresolved things there. We're thinking about an argument with our 2-year-old earlier in the day or something like that. So the ability to keep something in mind, to hold our attention in the present moment, is a courageous and ridiculously difficult task, right? As simple as it sounds, any meditator knows it's hard to remain in the present moment. The mind just doesn't want to do it. And the Buddha actually gives a metaphor for the skill of mindfulness, for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. And he describes mindfulness like a goad. And what a goad is a long, pointy wooden stick that, back in the day, the farmers would use to help keep the water buffalo plowing fields in a straight line. So the description is you have this water buffalo attached to a plow, and then you have your farmer who's got this pointy stick, right? And you're trying to get the water buffalo to kind of move straight, but it's going to wander. So it kind of goes off to the right, goes off to the left. So every time this creature starts to wander, you take this little or big stick and you just gently poke at it to get it back, right, into the present. And then it moves the other direction, and you take the stick and you poke it on the other side, and it moves back into the present. The Buddha talks about mindfulness being our ability to wake up, realize that the mind has wandered, and gently nudge it back into the present moment, keeping our object in mind, right? So I was curious I don't know anything about water buffaloes. So I Googled it, of course, and this really helped me actually. So I thought it was basically a cow, you know. A water buffalo can grow to be 9 feet tall and weigh about 2,500 pounds. And when a water buffalo gets running, they can run at over 35 miles an hour. So basically you have your plow attached to a car, essentially, right? Like, this is no joke, right? And so when you think of the wandering mind, we know what happens, right? You give the mind just, like you tell yourself, I'm just going to fantasize about the future just for a second and I'll come right back to the breath. It's gone, right? It's going at a quick speed, right? You can't catch up with it. Think of a water buffalo. If you're trying to plow a field and you don't nudge with intention, this thing's going to be plowing your neighbor's field, your neighbor's house. Like, this is no joke. This is a large animal with an incredible amount of weight and speed behind it. So the Buddha refers to mindfulness as the goad. It's our ability to keep something in mind, to gently remind the mind, to wake up in the present moment, realize that we've wandered away, and bring the mind back to our focus of attention. Ultimately, what we're keeping in mind is the present moment, but we need an object to ground ourselves there. So we often keep the breath in mind, right? Which opens up the experience to the present, our body, our moods, our mind, stuff like that. So mindfulness. So next time you're meditating and you feel dragged behind a water buffalo, you just goad it back into the present. So that's mindfulness. And it will make more sense when we get to equanimity. I'll explain the relationship there and why we often define mindfulness as equanimity. But for now, we'll keep that definition, the ability to stay present or keep something in mind. Once we're in the present moment, what do we do? This is the big question. Once we're there, once we can get the mind to settle down and move smoothly, right, in the present, we're asked to investigate. So if you look at our teeter-totter here, on the left-hand side, we have this kind of Sherlock Holmesy kiddo who's investigating the butterfly. Investigation in our meditation really is an act of exploration. I like Joseph Goldstein has a great metaphor, I guess, for investigation, and he says, investigation is like an investigative reporter that will stop at nothing to track down the truth of a story, right? They're hot on the trail of some breaking news story, and they will stop at nothing until they get to the truth, right? This is like Watergate or Russia meddling in the election. Like, the media can't stop, right? Investigation is that quest for truth within, and we're going to not stop until we find out what that truth is. In the case of us as meditators, right, what we're actually investigating moment to moment is the truth about the cause of happiness and the cause of suffering. We want to experience directly, moment to moment, what is causing our suffering and what is causing our happiness. When we can truly investigate that and see that, then we can abandon the causes and we can cultivate the enlightenment factors in their place. So if we don't investigate, we can't see what's going on, right? We have to explore what's going on moment to moment in order to find the truth of suffering and liberation. And what's interesting with investigation, I think, this is how I conceive of it in my experience. When we start meditating, we move from investigating the largest objects that we can see inside, and we move to more subtler and subtler, smaller objects in consciousness. We move from the grossest level of reality to the more subtler and subtler and subtler causes of our suffering. As mindfulness becomes more stable, as we can get that buffalo on track, it becomes clearer what's causing the suffering, right? And so as we move with our meditation, if you think of it in terms of how we're taught to meditate, we start with our breath, right? Simple enough. It's a larger object, right? We investigate the breath. Is it long or short? Is it deep or shallow? Is it pleasant or unpleasant? You investigate where you can feel it. Some people have an easier time feeling it in the abdomen or the chest. Some people feel it below the nostrils, above the upper lip. We begin to investigate, right? Then we begin to investigate the body. What's happening in our body moment to moment? What's happening in our mind moment to moment, right? We begin to see what's going on inside. That's our initial investigation. And as we did this morning, and as we do always when we're meditating, we begin to see and investigate the connections in consciousness. We begin to see, oh, look, there's physical pain here, and there's this connection between mental distress, right? Or there's this mental agitation, which is then affecting my physical body or my mood. And you begin to see inside that body, mind, emotions are all interconnected, right? And by seeing how those are interacting, we begin to see what kind of thought patterns are causing suffering. And we start to learn to abandon or let go of those habits, right? And in place of those, our enlightenment factors take hold. As we move through meditation and we get more mature in practice, what we see within becomes clearer. We begin to see our blind spots, right? We begin to shine light into those dark cracks and crevices inside. We begin to start to see like unresolved grief and loss, right? Our unreconciled relationships. We begin to see clearer the baggage, the grudges that we're holding, the things we're clinging to that are causing our suffering. And in order to let go of those things, we really do first have to investigate and find them before we can let go, right? Before we can let go, we really need to explore what's going on inside. And if you think of it in terms of some of the more abstract concepts in meditation, as the mind gets clearer, we begin to investigate things like not self, right? Anicca, impermanence. We begin to investigate the fact that all of this is changing, right? We begin to see that our identity is oftentimes a form of stress because we cling to our ideas, we cling to our worldviews, we cling to our bodily images, and so on. We start to really investigate these deeper layers of suffering through the ongoing mindfulness practice. So investigation is everything from just checking in with your breath to being able to see the impermanent nature of your thoughts. We investigate all the way down to see where there is suffering, where there are the enlightenment factors, how to let go, and how to cultivate. And this is kind of how investigation works. I'll say one more thing about that, maybe not. Let's see. No, I think that'll work. So we have mindfulness, our ability to remind the mind to come back to the present moment and to sustain something in mind, right? To be present. Once present, then we engage in investigation. Where is my suffering? Where is my path to freedom? In order to do this, every meditator knows that the mind does not meditate itself, right? It would be great. I kind of sometimes wish like it was like the microwave where I can like just tell my mind that I'm going to meditate for like 30 minutes and then go somewhere else and come back and it like dings and it's like, oh, sweet, done with my day, I can go on. It doesn't work that way, right? Anyone who's tried to meditate for even 2 seconds knows that there's energy and effort that has to be put in to be a meditator, right? Everything from getting to the cushion, which is a huge effort, to learning how to do the practice, correctly to get the results that we want. And then just keeping a regular practice, like that is part of our enlightenment factor of effort. And if you look at this little character here, I like this one because this character is doing a one-handed handstand, which is great. I'm sure that's exactly how the Buddha imagined it. And what's great about it, because it really does capture strength, balance, and a little bit of gracefulness, right? And that's really, for me, what captures effort. So I love this character. I'm going to read a quote by one of our Achans. I think this one's by Achan Jeff. Let me see here. Effort, okay. This is a quote from Achan Jeff. He's like the head monk at one of the monasteries down in San Diego area. The primary effort in meditation practice is to train the mind to rest in the present moment so we can see what is going on in the mind and then cultivate skillful qualities and let go of unskillful ones. Effort. So the Buddha has a couple cool metaphors about the struggle with effort. I think any meditator, no matter how many thousands of years ago who tried to sit on a cushion, we all experience the same war with the mind that we get into, right, when we're trying to get the mind to enter into the present. So he has the classic metaphor that a lot of you are familiar with, which is the lute metaphor. So this meditator comes to the Buddha, struggling with effort. The Buddha reminds him that he's a musician and says, when you tune your lute, if you tune the strings too tight and then you try to play it, it's going to break the strings and you won't be able to get any music. On the same time, if you don't tune them tight enough and they're lagging and you try to play them, there's no tone. Meditation is the same way, the Buddha says. Every one of us has to tune our own lute, right? Our own consciousness is let me put it this way, it's consciousness that's the canvas of our meditative experience, right? It's our musical instrument. Everyone's going to require a different amount of effort and a different type of effort to get the same results. Your effort's going to be different from the person sitting next to you, right? Some days your effort will be great. Some days you won't be able to find it to save your life. I mean, effort's really difficult, but everyone's going to fine-tune their own instrument. No one can really do that for you. Another way the Buddha describes effort is, this is the cow metaphor, which I like a lot as well. He says, you can spend all day milking a cow, and you can have the most dedicated effort, right? You can have great mindfulness and great investigation, and your effort's right on track. However, if you spend your entire day trying to get milk out of the cow's horn, it will not matter what your effort is, because that's not where the milk comes from, right? Meditation is the same way. You can spend all day long striving and struggling to be present, right? But if you're engaging in meditation in that way, we know what happens. We go to war with the mind, and there's no liberation to be found, right? It's just more struggle. So our effort really does need to be fine-tuned. And I think what I've noticed, most of the time, I think when students come to me and they're not getting the results that they would like from meditation, or they're struggling with effort, a few things are happening. First of all, you may not be doing the practice that's right for your disposition right now. There are dozens of meditation practices, right? There's so many meditation practices that cultivate the Enlightenment Factors. So if you're doing a meditation practice that isn't intuitively fun for you, it's boring, you want to find a meditation practice that inspires you to get to the cushion, right? Something that's really pleasant for you, something that you can do with ease. You don't want to be struggling against the practice itself, right? Because that's just going to be a drag. You're not going to get any results that way. And what I've found is that I've switched from certain practices where certain months it just feels like I need to do a lot of loving kindness practice, right? And then other times you do body sweeping practice or breath practice. You're not always going to need or want the same practice depending, where you are at. So it's helpful for effort to make sure you're doing a practice that really suits your need right then, right now. What does your body really need? What kind of practices are going to really inspire you? So don't feel bound to the practice just because it was the first one you got taught or read online or something. Feel free to experiment with all the different practices to find one that's really working for you. That can be really helpful. Another thing I find that students, that becomes evident when we're doing consults is that, like the Buddha was saying, sometimes we're trying to get milk out of a cow's horn. Sometimes I think in the West, when we talk about meditation, we don't want to say there's a wrong way to practice. But meditation is a skill like anything else, right? You can do meditation in a way that's going to have the exact opposite effect of what you'd intend, right? You can strive in meditation practice, you can cling, you can misplace your effort, you can overwork. So you can actually do meditation incorrectly. So sometimes we don't ever ask teachers, hey, am I doing this right? We just think we suck at it, right? We're like, oh, this just is so hard. And then it turns out you're trying to get milk out of a cow's horn, right? So check in with your fellow meditators, check in with your teachers, make sure your effort is placed in a way that's really going to produce pleasure, right? You want to make sure you're doing the right practice and you're doing it the right way. And the third thing that I notice is that sometimes we're just not practicing enough, right? With any skill that we have, it's going to take a certain amount of time in order to master the process, right? To really get the effects. And I can't remember who said this, but I always go back to it. There was a monk who said, whenever students come to me and ask, how much do I need to practice in order to experience liberation? What I'm really hearing is, how much can I get away with, right? How little do I have to practice to get the results, right? So I would encourage you to take the opposite approach to that. For meditation, some of us, it's going to require 20 minutes a day. Some people, it's going to require 40 minutes a day. Some people can practice a couple times a week and get results. Other people are going to need to sit daily. Now, in general, I encourage students to sit daily, because in my experience, that's where the best results come from. But you have to fine-tune your own loop. You have to decide what that energy is going to be. But I would encourage you to take on an experiment. Try to meditate more than you think you can. Try to meditate more than you think you have time for, but do it for a very short period of time, meaning decide to do 2 weeks where you sit for an hour a day, and then see how your life feels, like meditating that much. And then spend 2 weeks sitting for a half hour a day, and watch the difference in your consciousness. See what kind of music you get out of your meditation. And then cut it back, do 15, 25. Do whatever you need to do to feel what the appropriate middle point is for you to get the results that you like. Because oftentimes students say, oh, I'm not really getting the results, But that's really because for them, they need to just increase the meditation by 10 or 15 minutes, right? And you'd be surprised, sometimes just increasing meditation by that much will completely change your life. It will completely alter your meditation practice. Sometimes you're just shy, your lute strings are just sagging just enough, and you just need to tighten them a little bit to get what you're looking for. So keep that in mind when you're looking at effort and you're fine-tuning your own meditation practice. Rapture, our fourth enlightenment factor. So just to review, so we have our mindfulness, right? We enter the present moment, we investigate, we fine-tune our effort. As effort gets more refined for your disposition, mindfulness becomes easier. So when you're practicing the technique correctly with the right amount of time, the mind will remain in the present moment longer and with greater ease, and investigation will become easier. As the investigation becomes clearer, mindfulness gets strengthened. So these enlightenment factors support each other. They're not independent. So rapture is the last of our energizing factors. And I'll give you some definitions of rapture, which I think are kind of interesting. Rapture can just mean joy, but there's a couple other definitions that are also pretty common. So rapture can also refer to a physical experience in the body. It can be an experience of fullness, saturation, refreshment, satiation, like a feeling of deep satisfaction, or just a sense of well-being. Now, we come from a Judeo-Christian culture, so we have to just remember that the rapture that the Buddha is talking about here is not this is what we see on TV when lights come down and everyone gets zapped up to heaven, right? That's not the fourth enlightenment factor. If it was, we'd come in here and then by the end of the sit, like it'd be half empty, right? Or maybe all would be totally empty, I don't know. But that's not rapture, right? Rapture is a sense of well-being, a sense of joy, a sense of saturation and satiation in the mind and in the body. And what's interesting about rapture is the Buddha says, rapture is what's waiting for you in the present moment. Rapture is what's waiting for you in the present moment. If you're leaning too far into the future and fantasizing about what will be, or you're leaning too far into the past, mulling over some regrets or wishing you would have done something better, you're going to get far less pleasure in the meditation. Rapture is what occurs when you start to settle into the meditation. So anytime, you can sort of take this to heart as far as the good news, I guess. If you're feeling some pleasantness in your meditation, that's the enlightenment factor. This isn't magic, right? This is just the natural quality of the peaceful state of meditation. So at any moment that you're actually experiencing some pleasant sensations in the body, that means your mind is established to some degree in the present moment, and this is the gift that your mind gives you in return for having done that, or being present. And the Buddha refers to rapture as spiritual food. What he says is that we should feed on rapture like the radiant gods. We should feed on rapture like the radiant gods. And what he means by that is this. His quest was to see if it was possible to experience happiness that wasn't dependent on outside circumstances, right? Rapture is a pleasure that's generated from within. It is not dependent on outside circumstances. So for many people, when rapture starts to develop, when a deep sense of well-being starts to develop, that's when we start to have faith that it's really, truly possible to be free and be content in the present moment, no matter what's going on outside. So feeding on the pleasures of meditation, right? Being with those, enjoying the pleasure of meditation, allows us to lessen our dependence on having to consume outside experiences and outside circumstances, running here and there to be stimulated for a sense of joy, right? So the pleasures of meditation are the gifts of the practice. The Buddha encourages us to feed on them and to nurture them, because that's how we wean ourselves from that, like the hamster wheel of running back and forth, trying to find happiness with an attachment to things that are not permanent. So he encourages us to settle into the present moment and rejoice literally in that joy that we get from meditation. So investigation, effort, and rapture, those are all energizing. And as I said before, we can have too much of them. For some people, rapture can be just a very calm sense of well-being. For other people, it can actually be highly agitating. It could be a physical agitation that your body can actually rock back and forth because it's really intense, right? So these on the left-hand side of the teeter-totter really are energetic, right? They keep our mind alert and focused. And yet, within our experience as being meditators, we learn to keep them in check, right? As practice matures, we learn to keep them so our teeter-totter is balanced. And in order to balance those energizing factors, we move to the calming side of our teeter-totter, our more sedative enlightenment factors. And we have three here: tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And I like this tranquility guy here. He's got that little peace sign that he's contemplating. And the reason being is that the word tranquility can just as easily be translated as peace, calm, serenity. And the Buddha says, I may have mentioned this in the guided meditation, tranquility is just the counterpart to rapture. It is a deep sense of well-being. It's just more calming. Rapture is a more energizing sense of joy, and tranquility is the calming part of that. So they're really two sides of the same coin. And the Buddha says that tranquility begins to arise when we can truly let go of our concerns for the outside world. When we can truly put aside our duties, our roles, right? The things that just keep coming into the meditation, right? Time and again. The things that keep the mind wandering. And we can start to really let go of the world and sort of own the present moment, right? To be in the present. That's when tranquility begins to arise. And the Buddha talks about we can experience tranquility kind of in two ways. There's a bodily tranquility, and this just refers to that feeling in your meditation when the muscles start to relax, right? Where the physical tension starts to give way and the meditation posture starts to feel more comfortable. Now, I know for most of us, sometimes that doesn't happen very frequently, and it comes and goes. But really, on occasion, you'll have those moments where suddenly you're not even aware that you're sitting, right? You're just kind of inward, and you're not really paying attention to the body, because the body isn't experiencing any kind of physical distress. That's the tranquility factor. That's when the body begins to settle in and be at ease. Mentally, it's very similar. Tranquility is described as that moment when our thoughts, right, instead of racing back and forth, future, past, instead of racing, when those thoughts start to settle down and they become less frequent, that's tranquility. It's also defined as those moments where thoughts may still be arising in your practice, but you know, like those thoughts that just you latch onto them and you can't let go. Sometimes there's like some fantasy image and it keeps coming back and you just keep rolling with it, like you just keep going. Or there's some kind of anger or agitation that arises and it's just energizing and you can't not follow it. Tranquility arises when you can watch thoughts arise and pass away and they don't have any energetic charge. You can be like, oh yeah, that happened, this happened, but you don't race after them. You don't cling to them. That's tranquility. It's when the mind begins to settle down, right? Tranquility is similar to rapture. It's there for us in the present moment. It's the reward for being present with mindfulness, right? It's another one of the spiritual foods that the Buddha refers to. I always feel like there's one more thing to say when I come to the end of a factor, and I don't know if there is or not. Okay, let's say there isn't. Concentration. So we're moving deeper into our calming factors here, right? Concentration. I like this juggler here. This is pretty much what concentration is, keeping your eye on the ball, so to speak. Keeping your mind focused. The word concentration actually comes from the Pali word samadhi, which literally, more literally translated, means one-pointed attention or unification of mind. And the Buddha uses the term concentration to talk about two relatively distinct things. So I'll see if I can make this clear. First of all, concentration is just our ability to remain in the present moment for longer and longer periods of time. That's concentration in its simplest form, I think. Concentration is our ability to kind of sew together moments back to back, right? Continuous moments of mindfulness until mindfulness is just a stream. We're just present, right? Moment to moment, the mind isn't wandering. That's concentration. So mindfulness and concentration work hand in hand. So if mindfulness is our ability to remember to wake up, to bring the mind into the present moment, concentration is just a measure of how good we're doing at that, right? Concentration is just a measure of the depth of our mindfulness. It just says, oh, look, the mind is just present, moment to moment. I'm concentrated, right? That's how the term is used in its most simple sense. The reason that's important is that in order to investigate the cause of our suffering and to look inward and see through direct experience the cause of our happiness, we have to be still, right? We have to be able to see what's going on. And we know from direct experience, a wandering mind is a mind that's got some significant motion, right? It's 35 miles an hour in the wrong direction, right? So a mind in motion, it's hard to see what's going on. You can't see clearly the cause of suffering and happiness in your consciousness if you're not still enough in the present moment. If you can't rest in the present long enough to see, then you're just being pulled around. And we have those meditations where we do an entire sit, where we sit down, we intend to be with the breath, and then the alarm rings and you were like, what? Oh, okay. Yeah, and then it's over, right? We have those. If we can't be present, then we can't see. And if we can't see, we can't investigate, right? So it's this trickle down kind of thing. So concentration is just a measure of how, in any given moment or any given meditation, how continuous is the mindfulness? How much sustaining of attention can we get? How much is the mind unified around our object? Now, concentration refers to something else as well. Concentration refers to a series of deeply concentrated meditative states that are the result of continuous mindfulness, moment to moment. And these meditative states are referred to as the jhanas. I'm not going to go into them today, really, but I do want to say that they're there. And I do want to say that these meditative states, in their simpler form, they're very pleasurable, they're very tranquil. And again, the Buddha refers to them as spiritual food and encourages us to use these pleasurable states of consciousness to be less dependent on outside circumstance and stimulation for joy, right? This is part of that happiness that's generated from within. So I came up with a metaphor that I think can be helpful on concentration, so we can see clearly why it's significant to this whole process. So again, the wandering mind is a mind that has some pretty good speed to it, right? It's kind of frantic, oftentimes. Mine is, anyway. So imagine you're driving in a car, and you're going 100 miles an hour, and you're looking out the window. At that speed, you're going to be able to see some detail of things that are coming by, right? You'll be able to recognize, like, the Taco Bell sign, or the Starbucks sign, or, you'll recognize the theater marquee, or large Walmart parking lots, or whatever, right? You can see some things going at that speed. But at 100 miles an hour, you're going to be moving by too quickly to watch people like moving in and out of the store or to see any kind of detail. As you slow down the car, though, right? If you slow down to 20 miles an hour, you'll start to see detail that you were not able to see before. You'll be able to see people more clearly. You'll be able to see people pulling into parking spaces, or maybe you'll see that they're talking on their cell phone. The details of the environment will become clearer. Concentration at its deeper levels is when you stop the car. You stop the car and then you just look, and you can see the mind is in the present moment, and you begin to be able to see really clear details. You can see people inside the stores doing what they're doing, right? You can see the colors on their clothing. As the mind slows down and the speed decreases, as we really enter into the present moment, the stillness allows us to really see clearly what's going on. And it's that ability to be concentrated, to see clearly, that makes investigation and effort a lot easier, right? We can see clearer what's going on in the present moment. The jhanas are when you're in the car, it's stopped, and then you grab a telescope, and you start looking into the stores, and you start reading people's emails, right? Jhana is when you take concentration and you put it on steroids, and you use a magnifying glass to see what's going on. It's just deeper concentrated states where the present moment becomes clearer and clearer, right? Oftentimes the jhanas are talked about as if there's some kind of magical mystery tour or something. They're really just when the mind slows down, enters into the present moment, can remain present, so you can see clearly, what is the cause of my suffering? What do I need to abandon to experience freedom? That's concentration, I think, in a nutshell. And that brings us to equanimity. So as I spoke about earlier, equanimity is actually our loving, present, non-judgmental awareness. As meditators, this is usually the first association with mindfulness that we have. And again, in the West, when we talk about mindfulness, oftentimes mindfulness and equanimity, they just define them as one thing. So the definition of mindfulness becomes equanimity. And that's why we often don't think of mindfulness as just the refined skill of keeping something in awareness. We usually think of it as equanimity. But equanimity really is non-judgmental awareness. It's our ability, once we're in the present moment, to not react, to not jump on that thought train and take it away, right, out of the present moment. Equanimity is that depersonal state where we can just watch the show, like watching fireworks, right? We just watch things arise and pass away. And the reason equanimity is one of the first things that we focus on as meditators is that it's very hard to investigate anything in consciousness if we're continuing to react to everything pops up and we're just off and running, right? We have to have some equanimity to start to explore what's going on. And if we're not equanimous, we just go down the rabbit hole. So this is another reason why equanimity is so intimately tied to our definition of mindfulness, because without the equanimity, you can't keep the mind in mind. You can't keep an object in mind. So they are intimately connected, of course. And the Buddha says some really interesting things about equanimity. He says that habit patterns, right? He talks about habit patterns. He says sometimes, or a lot of times actually, if we just observe negative habit patterns in the mind, after a while, the habit patterns will fall away. And it's referred to as self-liberation, the self-liberation of habit patterns. And the Buddha says that oftentimes equanimity is really enough. If we can learn to be present and watch the negativities in the mind, after a while, they will fall away and you will not be triggered by them in the meditation or out of the meditation for that matter. Equanimity is hugely psychologically healing, right? We can deal with a lot of psychological baggage learning to develop equanimity. The Buddha describes it like this. He says, sometimes you have these habit patterns, right? And you just watch them, you just stare at them, but you don't engage, and they get embarrassed and they just run away. They don't want to be seen, right? They just they're out. And that's great. There's a lot of liberating, self-liberating habit patterns. But he also makes this comment. He says, there are a lot of habits in the mind where when you stare at them, they just stare back. And they're like, hell no, I'm not going anywhere, right? Bring it. They're just there and they're not going anywhere, right? You could be equanimous all day long and they're in for the long haul, right? They just dig their heels in. And as meditators, especially if you've been meditating for a while, right, over a period of years, you begin to see there are these stubborn habit patterns that in spite of equanimity will not go away. Well, they will eventually go away, but they're digging their heels in, right? They're not going away anytime soon. So there are plenty of habits that can be purified, so to speak, using equanimity and mindfulness and concentration. But the Buddha says there's plenty that are just going to stare right back at you and give you kind of a run for your money. There's a metaphor that he uses. He says, habit patterns can be one of three types. A habit pattern could be like drawing a line on the surface of the water. Just as you're drawing the line disappears, right? No effort. Some habit patterns, as soon as you start them, just evaporate, and they don't even really stick. Other habit patterns are like drawing a line in the sand. A little more permanent, but you could wipe them away quite quickly. The wind could blow, and by the end of the day, the line would be gone. Those are some other habit patterns. Then we have deeper habit patterns. They're habit patterns that are like chiseling a line into a piece of wood. We certainly could get that line out, right? We could make the wood level again, but that's going to take some elbow grease. That's going to take some sanding, right? We're going to have to sand down to get it to be level. Then he said, there are some habit patterns that are like a line chiseled in stone. This takes work, right? A lot more than just equanimity. We're going to need all the enlightenment factors at play. We're going to need something more than just observing it to let those habit patterns be released. In those cases, we do a lot more investigation. We really actively engage the habit pattern. The reason investigation is on the left side of the teeter-totter and equanimity is on the right is that when we enter into the present moment, oftentimes we have this kind of choice. Do I just sit back and watch the show? Or do I step into the frame and do a little work with what's going on? Do I ask questions such as, is this self? Is this not self? Do I do a little more energetic investigation? Or do I try to take more of a back seat and just cultivate equanimity? So as practice matures, we learn to use these two levers hand in hand to work with these habit patterns, whether they're habit patterns that are on the surface of water or if they're deeply chiseled in stone. And one of the indications, well, not indications, but as you mature in practice, one of the signs, I think, of that maturity is you begin to be intimately acquainted with these habit patterns, and you start to know when is it appropriate just to observe, and when you need to do a little bit more energetic effort to do something to try and dislodge or unattach yourself from them. Sometimes we need to tighten those lute strings just a little bit more, right, in order to get some of those deeper habit patterns to give way. So it's a balance in the end between equanimity, mindfulness, and investigation. Let's see. I'll say a couple more things. So what you'll notice when you look at these 7 enlightenment factors is that they all work hand in hand, right? They're arising and passing away moment to moment. They're not independent. If there's one there, there's probably 3 or 4 more sitting there in the corner. You might not be able to see them necessarily. But if you're in the present moment, there's going to be some concentration. If you're concentrated, there's going to be some mindfulness. If you're mindful, there's going to be some equanimity. There's going to be some effort all the time, right, if you're meditating at all. So this is just a blueprint, like a verbal conceptual description of what goes on in consciousness moment to moment. This is just a map that allows us to develop particular skills. So over a period of time, you begin to see, oh, wow, there's equanimity. I can really feel what equanimity feels like. You can feel when you're changing your effort. So this is just a blueprint. It's just a map to help you understand what's going on. It's not intended to where you have to sit with it when you're meditating and then you check off how many times equanimity got in consciousness. You don't want to be attached to the model, right? But it's just a helpful thing to come back to. In the Buddha's description of mindfulness meditations, like the one we did earlier, the Buddha does encourage us to sit in meditation and watch to see whether the enlightenment factors are present. So on occasion, checking in with your meditation and just saying, what's my effort like right now? And just being present with that. What does that feel like? How equanimous is my mind in this moment? Am I really feeling that I can accept myself right now? Or is there some negative self-talk that's coming up, right? You want to look and ask yourself, are there pleasant sensations in my body right now? Sometimes negative sensations in the body are so distinct that we forget that you can have a lot of physical pleasure and pain in the body at the same time. So you might have some unpleasantness in your meditation. You might be feeling angry, agitated, but if you pause and bring your awareness to your body, you might be surprised sometimes. There'll be some tranquility there, right? There'll be some rapture. And that's what the Buddha is saying is look in and see which of these qualities are there moment to moment. You'll surprise yourself how often, with a quick scan in your meditation, how many of these, are arising and passing away. So I'll just say one last thing. I'll finish the quote, but I was going to say one last thing. So what you can do with these enlightenment factors, if you want to throw people, next time someone asks you about your meditation, you can casually say, well, I was just developing some rapture and some concentration and, some tranquility, hanging out in the jhanas. You can use this to build your self-esteem as well. But it's important to know that anytime you're sitting in meditation, this is not magic, right? This is the description of human consciousness. Everyone in this room has these qualities and skills available to them. This is not out of our reach. This is just a description of how the mind works. So I don't want you to see it as some kind of magical thing. This is just the blueprint. This is the underpinnings of consciousness. We all experience the enlightenment factors if we're meditators, moment to moment in some way. So you can pat yourself on the back for cultivating them this morning. I'll just finish with one quote, and again, coming back to Mr. Cornfield here. Here we go. It all comes back to the mind. Mind is the start and end of all spiritual work. One can examine a path to see what qualities of mind are developed and see if that path will help to bring the factors of enlightenment further into balance. If so, then use it. Remembering that getting caught in further opinions and comparisons of various practices can be a great obstacle to liberation. So you want to use the enlightenment factors, but you don't want to be so attached to them that you can't practice with ease. You don't want to start throwing meditation practices in the trash because you're I don't think the concentration factor is really that developed in that practice. You go around to your friends who have different practices, and you're I don't know if it fits the bill. I think there's not enough rapture in that practice. You might want to switch that up. We don't need to do that, right? So I think that's all I got. Thank you so much for listening. We have another 6 or 7 minutes if Does anybody have any questions? We could do a question or two, if anybody has a question. We've got time for at least one, two, maybe. Okay. I'll try not to trip on this thing here. I think I added extra batteries to that.
So, your whole talk was based on meditating on the cushion.
That's awesome.
And I was just curious, when I look at this, for me, some of these factors I notice all the time in my life, and others I don't off the cushion. So, for example, concentration, I don't get that too much in my off the cushion life. And I was just curious if you could speak to these off the cushion.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, I didn't mention that you are going to experience them on and off the cushion, right? In life. So you might be somewhere. One of the benefits of being a meditator is that we know that it's helpful to investigate what's going on in the present moment. That simple fact separates the meditator and the non-meditator as far as their experience of suffering day to day. So most people, as soon as they experience some kind of suffering, they run away from it or they react to it, right? Where a meditator who knows that there's something else beneath there that can be investigated may stop, right? Be mindful and then try and explore what's going on. So even at work, in relationships, right? Oftentimes we can see investigation, mindfulness, maybe even equanimity, throughout our day, depending on what the mind is doing. Concentration, in general, concentration is going to be something we're going to be seeing when there's real intentional mindfulness, so you're not going to be seeing as much of it. However, as practice matures, you will be able to have continuous mindfulness in daily activities and experience concentration while you're doing other things. So you could be, say, washing dishes and being mindful. You can notice concentration through that kind of experience, or you're being mindful while walking, mindful while driving. You can experience some continuity of mindfulness in those moments, right? So that's how you would experience it. When you're talking about the deeper levels of concentration, yes, where the mind is stopped and still, that might be difficult while driving. I wouldn't recommend it. It's probably going to be difficult at work, and I don't even know if I'd recommend it there either. But if you think of concentration on the lighter end of continuity of mindfulness, I often practice, like when I wake up in the morning, to try to be mindful the minute I wake up and see how continuous my mindfulness can be from that moment until I get in the car to go to work. And I kind of watch to see if I can stay mindful in getting dressed, eating breakfast. So I try to make that mindful so I can have some of the concentration in my actual day activities. So you're right, some of these you're not going to notice day to day. And most of the time, if we're experiencing pleasure in our day, or happiness, or what we call joy, it's going to be from sense experience. It's not necessarily coming from within. But that being said, the meditator, right? The meditator consciousness over time gains a baseline of happiness that has nothing to do. You'll wake up and you'll have a sense of joy, right? A sense of ease and tranquility that will stay with you, right? That's the whole growth of awakening, right? Is that should happen more and more as you progress. So you may notice in a time of distress, if you can bring mindfulness to your body, that there's a little bit of cultivated equanimity, right? A little bit of rapture, a little bit of tranquility that's still there as the result of meditation, even if you're in activity. So yeah, you won't notice it as much, but if you look for it, you can learn to sustain them in your activities. So yeah, that's a good question. Thanks. Yeah, Avi.
So did the Buddha have anything to say about earworm?
I'm sorry, about what?
Earworm.
Earworm?
It's like when that Taylor Swift song just keeps playing over and over in your head, which is to me a little bit of a different experience than the sort of thought about somebody maybe I'm irritated by and I can't quite shake that, but there is a choice there. But the earworm thing seems to operate in its own channel.
Oh, certainly. It's like a virus, right? Yeah, it's malware for sure. I mean, it's embedded in. Yeah, I think if you look deeply in the text, there might be a passage that says earworm is suffering. I'm not sure. I'd have to look and see. But you'd handle earworm as the same way you'd handle anything, right? Which is when distress arises, right? We investigate and find, why is this suffering? Where is the suffering, right? When you feel that sense of distress, can you bring mindfulness to the sense of agitation? Can you look and see, what would it require for me to abandon my reactivity to this Taylor Swift song and just be equanimous to that tagline or the jingle, right? So you're still going to use the moment as a meditative opportunity for awakening. You're still going to ask yourself, can I be present with the sensations that are arising, right? You can also use it, if it's in your head and not something on the radio, where you can actually use it as a sense door exercise, right? Where you're mindful of sound, contact, reactivity, that kind of meditative practice. But if it's just coming in your head like you're talking about, that's just another thought stream, right? You can ask yourself, how long will this last? Hopefully it doesn't last all day, but you can look at it and say, okay, I'm going to be with this and see how long this lasts, right? You can go into the body and see, because you might have this sense, I'm really averse to this. But can you stop and be mindful of the actual aversion? Like, where's the aversion? And be present and hold that in the body. Like, here is my aversion to Taylor Swift lyric. But be with the aversion, not the lyric. So you can use mindfulness to kind of unpack and let go of. And in that moment, what you're doing is you're replacing the antagonistic response with the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, right? Of effort, investigation. If you can sustain it for a couple minutes, then you've got concentration. So in that moment, you can use a Taylor Swift lyric for liberation, right? I'll let her know, right? So thanks for the questions. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. Doyle is going to guide us through our closing circle.
Let's form a circle, and if you would enjoy doing so, join hands. And as Gregory led us at the beginning of the morning, let's just hold a thought of gratitude to each of us, to our own self, for being here today, for getting up and making the effort to come to the hall, the Dharma hall, to sit and to be present, to learn. Let's appreciate and give ourselves some gratitude for giving ourselves to enjoy just simply being here together, and enjoying the laughter during the teaching from Gregory's wonderful sense of humor, and just being able to deepen our understanding, and then from here hopefully deepen our practice of the Enlightenment Factors. And let's take a moment and turn to the person on either side of us and just say, thank you for being here this morning. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you. And then let's extend our gratitude to our founding teacher, Robert, and for all the years, the decades of effort that he undertook to help bring his vision for a Dharma center in Portland, Oregon into reality, and for the great generosity of our Dharma grandmother, Ruth Dennison, who financially and spiritually, emotionally, physically did so much to help birth this center. And now let's extend the wish to our loved ones that they might be free from suffering, that they might know the true happiness that is completely without suffering. beyond that to our neighbors. May you be free from suffering. May you know the great happiness. And then to all the inhabitants of Washington, D.C., if there was liberation, true liberation in Washington, D.C., what kind of impact could that make in the world? And now to our every fellow human being and every living being, the creatures that crawl inside the earth and on the earth, the flyers, the swimmers, the four-leggeds, the crawlers. May we all be free from suffering. May we all experience that liberation that is not dependent on any earthly thing. And do we have any kids still around? No? Then, may all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for being here. Please come and enjoy some food and fellowship back in the living room. And if you'd like some spiritual coaching this morning, sign up. We've got 3 slots available, and I'll happily serve as your coach today. Thank you. Ah. 1, 2, 3. Woohoo! We rock.